The laser cutter requires the use of a scheduled time. When your time arrives, tap your buzz card and hit the login button. The power will be activated to the machine and the light will turn on. Once you're at the machine, hit the power button and check to make sure that the machine homes. Open the lid, check for any debris, and homing will be when the machine moves the optics around to its home position. Without this procedure, the machine will not be able to operate. Once you've got your material ready, bring it over to the machine and measure the thickness. It may be helpful to write the thickness on the surface of the material so you don't forget what the dimensions were later in the operation. You'll then set up your parts in either Illustrator or SolidWorks. And what you're going to see here is vector and raster mode operation. Raster mode is what's happening right now. That means that if a black pixel is present, it'll be 100% power. If a white pixel is present, it'll be 0% power. Anywhere in between of gray would be interpolating between that. It's great for engraving and marking and logos and such, but it does take a long time. In order to cut something out, you need vector mode operation, which requires a mathematically defined curve. That's what you're seeing here. Most of the time you want to use vector operation unless you're doing something decorative. Once your job is run, you'll pull it out of the machine and clean it up, and you'll have a nice, very precise part. I'll show you how to set it up now in Illustrator and SolidWorks. In order to laser cut from Illustrator, you'll need to create a new document that has the same size as the laser cutter's bed. That's 32 inches wide and 18 inches tall. You'll also want to set the document color mode to RGB color so that you have the opportunity to use the laser cutter properly. Once you've opened the file, double check that it's in the RGB color mode by going to File, Color Mode, and then draw the data that you want to cut. In this case, I'm going to double click, and that'll allow me to specify the size directly of the rectangle. The text will be black and will be raster engraved. The lines will be red and 0.001 points in thickness. That will allow us to do a vector engraving. The vector engraving will cut out the rectangle, and the raster engraving will be our decorative element on top. Now I need to set the lines to 0.001 points in thickness. This is the minimum thickness Illustrator allows, and that communicates that it needs to be cut all the way through. So type in 0.001 pt, then choose a line that you want to change to the vector and specify 25500 in the RGB color channels to ensure that it's a perfect red. This way it'll be detected by the printer driver as the correct color. Now we have to specify the correct printer driver, which is called VLS 660. Click on the Setup button, hit Continue, and then hit Preferences. The VLS 660 laser cutter settings dialog will come up. We'll go into more detail on specific settings and safety later. Once you're done setting your settings, you'd close that dialog box and hit Print. The file is now queued up on the laser cutter and ready to run. Setting up a job from SolidWorks is very similar. Create a drawing and set the sheet size to 32 inches wide by 18 inches tall. Right-click on the menu bar and enable the Line Format toolbar. This will allow you to click on the far right icon, which will show you the correct outline of the drawing. Now, create the data or lines that you want to cut. In this case, I'm doing a 2-inch by 2-inch square, and after I've put in the smart dimensions, I'm going to delete the smart dimensions because I don't want to actually engrave the shapes of those smart dimensions. Then I'm going to use the annotation tool to create my text. Now I've got a blue line, which is going to be the vector art, and I have the black text, which is going to be representing my raster shape. Again, I would hit the print dialog, and in this case I need to hit the line thickness box to set the line thickness to 0.02 of an inch. That's 0.002 inches. I set that for all line thicknesses, and then to set settings I would click on the properties. Hit OK, and the file is sent to the laser cutter. This laser cutter is fairly powerful and potentially dangerous if used incorrectly. A fire triangle shows how fuel, heat, and oxygen must be combined to create a fire. A fire extinguisher removes the oxygen, and turning off the laser gets rid of the heat. Doing either of these two things will ensure that the fire goes out. Often just hitting pause is enough to stop a flare-up. In order to prevent any fires, we need to set the settings correctly. There are three main settings: power, speed, and Z-axis. There's also PPI, which is pulses per inch. PPI should always be set to 1,000. The Z-axis should always be set to exactly the thickness of your part that you measured with calipers. Before you move on, make sure you hit the red set button or else the settings will not be maintained. If you do not set the Z-axis to exactly match the thickness of your part, there's a high likelihood that you'll damage the laser, start a fire, and you certainly won't get a good quality print. Never set the speed at less than 3%. Feel free to experiment with settings. You have to experiment with settings in order to get things right. However, setting the power to 100 and the speed to less than 3% essentially guarantees a fire. Wood should be cut faster than plastics because once it chars, it won't cut anymore. So these are good settings to start with. Because acrylic doesn't char, it can be cut a little slower. So at 100% power and 3 speed, you can repeat that as many times as necessary to cut all the way through the thickness that you have. You should never cut PVC and polycarbonate because they release chlorine gas. ABS, when cut, releases cyanide. Epoxy, carbon fiber, fiberglass, and foams don't cut well and may catch on fire.